Hi, my friends. Thank you for joining me. I'm honored that you're here and willing to spend some time with me on this 8th episode of Echoes of Curiosity. I'm very curious this evening. I'm recording this on Palm Sunday. It is the 29th of March, and Palm Sunday is really something that I have very fond memories of through the years. Growing up, it really was and still is, at least in the Christian tradition, the entrance to Holy Week. It was the beginning of Holy Week. And then Holy Week in the Catholic Church, the Catholic tradition in which I was raised, it had great significance. And I always remember very long readings on Palm Sunday. In fact, I've gone to Mass on Palm Sunday as recently as just a few years ago. And it's still very much the same, really. This episode is going to be a unusual episode. I'm talking about a subject that is really difficult, I think, for most people to discuss in our society. And I wish that wasn't the case. But what I'm going to be talking about this evening is death. There are moments in life when fear becomes so large, so loud, that it fills the entire room. In my early 30s, I found myself in one of those moments. I was facing a life-threatening illness. I had a dangerously low platelet count condition. That's a blood condition. And the long-term effects of steroids that I'd been taking that were meant to save me had quietly begun to take their toll. And they weakened the bones in my hips to the point where one of them, my left hip, deteriorated so severely that it required immediate replacement. This condition was known as avascular necrosis. It's very serious. And I had it in both hips, but the left hip was so degraded, I guess that's the right word. It was so bad that my left leg was 1 inch shorter than my right leg. Or at least that was what the doctors told me at the time. They had the surgery for that hip replacement at Lipschi. It is a part of the large Parkland hospital in Dallas. And I was only 32 years old. It's a lot for a young man to hold at that time, and eventually I couldn't hold it anymore. I couldn't. I had what might be referred to today as some kind of emotional breakdown. I don't know what the medical term for it is. I know that back in the day, as they say, it was a nervous breakdown. A nervous breakdown. That's probably a suitable name for it, I think. I remember the day my mind simply gave out. And part of this was because I was facing what I thought was imminent death. There's no elegant way to describe it. Absolutely no elegant way to describe it. It was an emotional collapse. It was a breaking open. I was broken open. I was terrified, not just of the surgery and not just of the illness, but of the uncertainty that wrapped itself around everything. The future felt like a dark hallway that I just couldn't step into. And that's where I'm starting tonight. But I've got a lot more to say about this. So I am curious, as I hope you are. I'll be back in an instant. The year was 1998. I was living in Texas, in Fort Worth, Texas, and the fear was overwhelming. I was prepared to die. Well, let me put it another way. I was unprepared to die and fearful, very, very fearful. But in the middle of that fear, I heard a sound that I will never forget. The door opened. My parents had flown down from Pennsylvania to be with me, and when they walked into the room, I have to say something shifted. They didn't arrive with answers. They didn't have solutions for me. They simply arrived with presence. They arrived with presence, and it was the presence, that kind of presence that doesn't try to fix you, but simply sits beside you. And my breathing slowed. Before they arrived, I think I didn't sleep for 7 days, and I have that written down in a journal somewhere, but it was a number of days, and I want to say a week. And once my parents arrived, the first night that they were there with me, I slept maybe 1 hour, and then the second night that they were there, I was able to sleep for 2 hours, and so on. And oh wow, that was great. My mom, she was worried. She was worried. It showed in her face. But she was steady. She always was. She was steady. My father, he was grounded. He had a way about him that was quiet sometimes and then talkative at other times. But when he got quiet, I could tell that was it was the unspoken words that I imagined that he would have been saying. So he rarely said these kind of words, but this is when I would have said that he, if he was speaking the way he was feeling at that time, I think he would have said, "We are here, and you are not alone in dealing with this." But those are the things that helped for fear of death to loosen its grip. Nothing had changed medically. No, I guess the thing that changed basically was that I was no longer feeling like I was facing it alone. As I look back at this, I understand something I didn't have words for then. Fear lives in the future. But when my parents walked into that room, I wasn't in the future anymore. I was right there, in the present moment. And I was being held by the people who had known me since my first breath. And in that presence, fear simply couldn't survive. That moment became a turning point, not just in my health journey, but in my understanding of what it means to face mortality, uncertainty, and the stories that we tell ourselves about both. over the years, I found myself drawn to two books that helped me make sense of what I had lived through and almost died through. And it wasn't that it was emotional reckoning with that. These books that I discovered were more about death, dealing with death in a clinical sense, clinically, practically, and compassionately. The first was a book titled On Death and Dying. And that book it's a very well-known book by Elisabeth Kübler-Ross. And her work opened a door for me. She wrote with such clarity about the ways we avoid talking about death and how silence isolates the dying person, and how presence, simple, honest presence, can be the most healing thing we offer one another. Reading her helped me understand why my parents' arrival that day had such power. They didn't take away the danger I was facing. They took away the aloneness. That's a big deal. I have a copy of that. I just pulled these books off my shelf just so I can show you. On Death and Dying. This is the book. I have it in a small paperback version here by Elisabeth Kübler-Ross. The second book is a very fascinating book called How We Die. And this is it. I think it was published in 1992. How We Die. It is by a gentleman, a doctor by the name of Sherwin Nuland. Sherwin Nuland. He approaches it from a different angle. He approaches the subject of death from a different angle. It's very clinical, unflinching in that respect, but also a deeply human telling of this clinical aspect of death. He wrote about the body with honesty, stripping away the illusions we often place upon it. And strangely, that honesty brought comfort. It did. It reminded me that the body, for all its complexity and fragility, it's not the whole of who we are. It is not the whole of who we are. Understanding its processes, its limits, its vulnerabilities, helped loosen the fear I had wrapped around it. It grounded the experience of dying in the mechanics of the body, while quietly pointing to the truth that our identity is something larger, something untouched by those mechanics. Thich Nhat Hanh often wrote that when we return to the present moment, we return to ourselves. And A Course in Miracles teaches that fear is simply misperception, a story the mind tells me when it forgets the truth of who I am. That day, without knowing it, I experienced both teachings at once. Presence didn't change my medical situation, it changed me. And that brings me to something I've thought about for years. Fear of death is natural. It's part of being human. But fear of talking about death, that's the part that's always struck me as strange. Death is the one experience that every single one of us will face. It's universal. It's inevitable. And yet, in so many cultures, we treat it like a taboo subject, something morbid, something inappropriate, something to avoid at all costs. But for me, talking about death has never felt morbid. It has felt honest, even grounding. When we talk about death, we are really talking about life. What matters? What lasts? What we believe continues when the body falls away. And that's where my curiosity has always led me. What survives death? What remains when the physical form is gone? For me, the only answer that has ever made sense is spirit. That quiet, steady essence that feels like the truest part of who I am, who we are. Of course, not everyone sees it that way. There are people who believe that this physical life is all there is, that consciousness ends when the body ends. And I respect that perspective. And while I respect that perspective, I've always felt that it leaves the door wide open for the ego to take over. And that's exactly what happens. To cling, to grasp, to fear. The ego insists that meaning must be squeezed out of every moment because nothing lies beyond it. That's just an awful way to move through life, in my opinion. But when I allow myself to be curious, truly curious, something shifts. Curiosity softens fear. I've talked about this before. It opens space. It invites us to explore the deeper questions. What are those questions, right? There's a few. I've written some down here. I'm going to take a look at what I have on my notes. I do have notes. So, the deeper questions. What is the nature of consciousness? What is the self? What does it mean to end, quote unquote end? What does it mean to continue, quote unquote continue? So those aren't, in my mind, those aren't morbid questions. They are profoundly human ones. And when you look across cultures, you can see that every society has its own way of approaching death, its own rituals, its own expressions of grief, its own beliefs about what happens next. Some traditions celebrate. I know that when we were living in Mexico, I enjoyed some of the aspects of the Day of the Dead celebrations because they were celebrating life, it seemed, and honoring it. Some traditions mourn. They mourn. They take that aspect, and I guess it's part of death and grieving. Mourning is a big part of that. But I want to say some traditions focus on that. Some guide the spirit, and some honor ancestors. That's a very common thing in some cultures, to honor ancestors. The fact is that the diversity is astonishing. It really is. And honestly, it's a vast subject. But it tells me something important. I'm not alone in my wondering. And if you're wondering, you're not alone either. Trust me, you're not alone. As we come to the end of this conversation, I want to leave you with something simple. Death is not an easy subject. It brings up fear and uncertainty, and for some, a lot of resistance. But it also brings up meaning. It brings up questions that matter. And if we allow ourselves to approach those questions with curiosity instead of dread, something softens and opens. For me, that opening began years ago in a hospital room, as my parents were just by my side. They dissolved the presence. They dissolved that presence of fear, I guess, letting me know that I didn't need to be fearful. I wasn't alone. Maybe that's what we need to think about when we think about death, because death seems to be, and if we're dealing with just physical death, it is something that's very solitary. You're on this journey. It seems like the time when you're really alone. I mentioned these couple books that I'll put some of this information on in the comments section of the channel. But this whole journey and this discovering what death means to me has continued through other books and through spiritual teachings and a lot of quiet moments of reflection and conversations I had with my mother right up until her death. We talked frequently about death and dying. I think that took away some of the stigma, for sure. I think having a willingness to ask questions that most people avoid is a sign of some spiritual maturity, I think. So if this episode stirred something in you, whether it's a memory or a question, a sense of wonder, I want to invite you gently to explore it. Not to force answers, but to simply stay curious. You don't have to arrive at a conclusion now. Just be curious. Curiosity is a form of courage. It's a way of saying, I'm willing to look. I'm willing to feel. I'm willing to ask what this life is really about. Recently, I wrote a blog post about this subject as well, about death and grief. And in that blog, I actually wrote about a much more recent near-death experience back in 2016 when I did really come close to death again. But I wrote this blog piece, and it contained a lot about death, of course, and that experience for me back in 2016, and grief, and the way that those experiences shaped me and continue to shape me. If you'd like to go deeper on that, if you want to sit with these ideas in a different way, I'll share a link to that blog in the comments section as well. You're welcome to read it at your own pace and your own time, in whatever way feels right for you. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for your openness, your presence, and your willingness to explore something that so many people shy away from. Your time matters, your inner world matters, and I'm grateful we can walk through this together. Until next time, my friends, stay curious, stay gentle with yourselves, and remember, fear cannot follow you into the present moment.